The greatest palaces in history had a secret. Under the marble, under the columns, there was another world, a hidden world of engineering. Tunnels, channels, a labyrinth. That's what really powered these ancient cities. The overlooked infrastructure, the silent systems. They managed water, they managed waste. They managed resources for an entire civilization. So you start to see these places differently. The true genius wasn't what was displayed, it was what was buried. A queen's bath was connected to a city's survival. A king's hidden tunnel mattered more than his golden throne. There's a forgotten masterpiece of engineering beneath the ruins we think we know. You'd stand in the courtyard at Persepolis, a forest of stone, columns carved with figures holding up a roof that seemed to touch the sky, and the staircases, the reliefs of tribute bearers, the scale of the palace, a display of absolute power meant to stun. But what you couldn't see, what you'd never be shown, was the reason any of it was possible. Far from that sun-baked courtyard back in the mountains, there were these gently sloping tunnels, Qanats, hand-dug channels miles long, capturing groundwater and guiding it toward the city on the plain. That water didn't just fill the fountains, it fed the palace gardens, it sustained the artisans' quarters, it let thousands live and work in a harsh landscape. The palace's power was a performance. But the hidden infrastructure was the stage, the script, the lifeblood of the whole thing. For a long time, archaeology was captivated by the performance. Early explorers went for the art, the architecture, the treasures. They documented every column, every inscription. But a city isn't just a collection of beautiful buildings, it's a living organism. And to understand how it lived, how it survived season to season, you have to look down, shift your gaze from the facades to the ground, and then deeper. The real story of urban survival is written in clay pipes, in sewer channels. In the subtle gradient of a stone gutter. Dr. Smith, she studies ancient water systems. She says the palace was the heart of the empire, but the infrastructure was the circulatory system. Without it, the heart stops. That changes everything. It means the true measure of a civilization's genius isn't the weight of its gold, it's the flow of its water. The silent, practical magic that turned a royal residence into the engine of a city. Proving the foundation of power was never just symbolic, it was breathtakingly real. You have that worker in the palace of Knossos in a narrow passage, his hands on a pipe. He's not working on a fresco, he's not handling olive oil. He's maintaining the palace's pulse. This whole web of pipes, some big enough to walk through, bringing spring water from the mountains right into the complex. For baths, for latrines, for gardens. That was the first system, the vital one, the water supply. The challenge was huge. How do you bring a river to a city on a plain or a palace on a hill in a dry place? Different civilizations found different answers, but they all used the same principle. You let gravity do the work. In Persia, the answer was the Qanat. A team starts at the base of a mountain where water is underground. They dig a mother well straight down, maybe 100 feet until they hit water. Then they dig a tunnel back toward the city with a gentle slope. Every few hundred feet, they dig another vertical shaft to the surface, for air, for removing debris. It creates a dotted line across the desert, marking the hidden river below. The slope was everything, a fraction of a degree. Too steep, the water rushes and erodes. Too shallow, it stagnates. This gravity network could move water for dozens of miles, with no evaporation. But bringing the water was just the first step. You had to make it usable. Before it entered the palace, it often went through settling tanks, simple pools where the flow would slow, letting sand and silt sink to the bottom, a basic purification, cleaning the water before it reached a bath or a drinking cup. And storage was critical. Vast underground cisterns, lined with plaster, acted as the city's battery, holding millions of gallons for dry periods for a siege. A palace's security wasn't just in its walls, it was in these buried reservoirs. The endpoint could be breathtaking, like the Roman Palace of Domitian on the Palatine Hill. A visitor would see the Nymphaeum, this elaborate multi-tiered fountain, with statues, mosaics, water cascading down, a spectacle of wealth. But that spectacle was the final display of a journey that started miles away. That water arrived by aqueduct, an elevated channel crossing valleys maintained by unseen workers. The fountain was a declaration. We command nature. We've brought the mountain spring to our doorstep. This command of water dictated everything. The path of an aqueduct decided where a city could grow. The location of a cistern decided which neighborhoods would thrive, and access mapped power. The pipes went to the palace baths and kitchens first. The elites had private connections. The broader population used public fountains. The infrastructure mapped power in a literal way. So we followed the water into the city, into the palace. But that leads to a question, one that's often overlooked. What happened to all that water after it was used? The water had done its work, but now it carried something else. Every sip, every bath, it all created a river of waste, and that river had to go somewhere. Managing that flow became the second great system, a hidden testament, a sign of how a civilization understood public health. Deep under, over 4,000 years ago, workers laid bricks. They formed a precise network. These weren't grand avenues. They were covered drains, carefully sloped, carrying away from homes, away from public spaces, out toward the city's edge. This wasn't an afterthought. It was a foundational principle, a statement. A healthy city required the invisible removal of what it no longer needed. In palaces, this system reached another level. Take the Minoan Palace of Knossos. Its plumbing was advanced. They had pipes for supply, but also elaborate stone drains built into the floors and walls. They even had what we call flush toilets, a wooden seat over a clay conduit, a container of water nearby to wash the waste down into the larger sewer channels below. It was a private convenience, a scale of thoughtfulness that wouldn't be seen again in Europe for thousands of years. The philosophy behind it is captured by an engineer and historian, John Burge. He noted their sanitation systems weren't merely functional. They were statements of civic order, of control over nature, to channel filth away, to separate the clean from the unclean. That was imposing human logic on life's messiness. It was a form of power, as real as any army. A palace that smelled of gardens, not decay, was a palace that commanded respect, through its mastery of the mundane. Nowhere was this mastery more monumental than in Rome, the Cloaca Maxima, the greatest sewer. It began as an open drainage channel, 6th century before the Common Era. Over centuries it was enclosed, expanded, maintained. It drained the Roman Forum, the heart of public life. Later it served the imperial palaces on the hills. This was infrastructure built to last, engineered with a vaulted stone ceiling, wide enough for a boat to pass through. Its longevity is staggering. Parts of it are still in use today, carrying stormwater. The Cloaca Maxima wasn't just a sewer. It was a permanent underworld foundation for the city above, a literal bedrock of Roman civilization. So how did managing this unpleasant thing contribute to social stability? It reduced the spread of illness. In dense populations that allowed cities to grow larger, more complex, it prevented the contamination of the clean water supply, protecting that first system. But perhaps most importantly, it created a shared standard of living. When the state, embodied by the palace, took responsibility for removing waste, it provided a basic public good. It said order and health were collective priorities. That fostered a sense of civic belonging. It reduced the tensions that fester in squalor. The efficient, unseen removal of waste was a quiet promise of safety. But to keep that promise, especially in cities of stone and marble, ancient engineers faced another relentless force. The efficient removal of waste was only possible with another hidden marvel: the management of rainfall. Rain could be a blessing, but it could turn into a curse just as fast. In Tikal, a sudden storm would turn the plazas into rivers, water threatening the foundations of the central Acropolis. But it never pooled for long. It would vanish through grates, captured by a network of plastered channels buried right underfoot. That water wasn't wasted. It was guided into huge man-made reservoirs stored for the dry season. That was the unseen shield. Stormwater management, flood control, a third critical system protecting everything the palace stood for. The techniques were ingenious, tailored to the place. Some cities used permeable pavements, surfaces of packed gravel or fitted stone, letting water seep through to reduce runoff to recharge the groundwater below. Other places had diversion channels carved along hillsides, acting like moats against flash floods, directing the deluge safely away. And there were always the underground cisterns, gargantuan tanks, shock absorbers for the whole system, capturing a storm surge to use later. The Romans perfected this with hydraulic cement, a waterproof mortar for building their specus, their aqueduct conduits. Incredibly durable, but they applied that same knowledge to drainage. The specus that brought clean water in were mirrored by channels just as robust, carrying stormwater out, protecting the substructures of their forums and palaces. Maybe the most dramatic example is Persepolis. Built on a massive stone platform at the base of a mountain, the whole complex was vulnerable to torrential runoff. The engineers' solution was a masterpiece of foresight. They carved a system of massive drainage tunnels right through the platform's foundation stones. These weren't small pipes. They were large enough for a person to walk through, designed to instantly capture a catastrophic flood and redirect it away from the palace walls. Infrastructure as a permanent guardian. This understanding of local climate was profound. In the Indus Valley, the Great Bath wasn't an isolated monument. It was the centerpiece of an elaborate water scheme. The entire citadel mound was engineered with layers of brick and bitumen to be watertight, with drains ensuring even ritual bathing water was channeled away. They built for the monsoon, knowing that controlling water flow was the difference between a city thriving and a city washed away. This constant challenge demanded one final crucial layer of hidden engineering. Controlling the flow, both clean water and waste, required more than design. It required control, the ability to direct it, to start and stop it, to send it where it was needed. And that meant someone somewhere in the palace had to be able to command those invisible rivers. Beneath the courtyards of Harappa under the sun, you'd find a different treasure. Not gold, grain. These chambers underground, cool and dark. Floors raised up on brick, walls with shafts for air. These were the palace granaries. They could hold a surplus to feed the city for months, maybe years. That was the third system, storage and logistics. A city's survival depended on bringing resources in and then locking them away. Preservation was a science. The raised floors kept grain above the damp. They kept pests out. Those ventilation shafts let air move. That prevented rot, prevented mold in the humidity. And they placed these granaries away from the river's floodplain. Deliberate, every feature answered a threat: spoilage, infestation, theft. To lose the stored wealth was to lose the city. Economic archaeologist Dr. Liam puts it this way: control over storage was control over wealth, over resilience. These granaries were like central banks. They stabilized prices when things were scarce. They paid workers in kind. They fed the palace guard. They fed the bureaucracy. The grain silo was a tool of statecraft, as potent as law. A full granary meant a calm people. An empty one meant disaster. And this principle scaled to an empire, to Rome's warehouses along the Tiber River, multi-story, fireproofed with brick, guarded carefully. They held grain from Egypt, olive oil from Spain, wine from Gaul, a river of goods flowing into the city's stomach, and a direct line ran from those up to the palaces on the Palatine Hill. The imperial household's needs, food, oil, textiles, were met by this hidden supply chain. The palace's grandeur was by warehouses most people never saw. So how did this storage prevent unrest? It was a buffer against panic. In a drought, when the harvest failed, the palace could open the granaries, distribute grain, sell it at a fixed price. That act transformed the ruler from a distant authority into a provider. It built loyalty. It proved the state's foresight, its capacity to care. And the very knowledge the palace held these reserves was a deterrent. It meant the center of power could withstand a siege, outlast a rebellion. The psychological security was as important as the stockpile. But managing these vast stores, knowing what was where, how much was left, when to distribute, that created its own challenge, a monumental one. It demanded a fourth system, invisible, one that moved not water or grain but information. A servant was carrying a heavy clay jar. The smell of oil filled a narrow passage. His world was stone and shadow. A tunnel carved right through the earth under the palace. Up above in the courtyards there were diplomats, ceremonies, but down here it was the business of survival. Unseen, this was the fourth system, the hidden highways, a separate circulatory system for goods, servants, urgent messages. These service corridors were the ultimate expression of a palace's two faces, one for ceremony, another for function. Their construction was pragmatic, austere. Walls of rough-cut stone or floors worn smooth by footsteps, built for utility, not beauty. Light came from small, high windows or an occasional oil lamp. The key was their route. They connected the critical points. Kitchens to storerooms, guard posts to gates, the scribes' quarters to the throne room, all while avoiding the grand public spaces. This design served two masters, efficiency and security. Supplies could move quickly, without disrupting the theater of power above. And the security detail could move through these private arteries, unseen until they were needed. Different civilizations refined this. In early Mesopotamian palaces, archaeologists find corridor houses. Structures where narrow, winding passages are the core layout. They control access to every room. You couldn't move freely. Your path was dictated, funneled past checkpoints. In Roman villas, they built a long, covered gallery, often semi-subterranean. It was a sheltered walkway in bad weather, but also a discreet service route. Slaves could move along it, invisible to guests in the garden. Then there are the most famous hidden passages, suspected in the palace of Knossos. Beyond the plumbing, a labyrinth of narrow corridors and small, puzzling rooms. It suggests a network for rapid, private movement. Some scholars think certain passages were escape routes, a way for the elite to vanish from one part of the palace and reappear in another, or exit the complex entirely in a crisis. Whether for escape or for control, these passages gave the power of invisibility to the few. This architecture of separation did more than move goods. It reinforced a social order. The grand courtyards and audience halls were for the elite, for display. The hidden corridors were for the workers, the guards, the messengers. The two worlds were designed to rarely meet. A visitor of status would see spacious beauty, orderly ceremony. Never the effort that made it possible. This physical division mirrored the social one. It made the sustaining labor literally invisible. It reinforced the idea that the ruler's power was effortless, a natural force. The hidden corridors were a tool of social control, ensuring the machinery of state never interrupted the performance. And these discreet passageways always led to the most sensitive spaces. The rooms where the true levers of power were pulled, not with ceremony, with calculation. The air in that corridor was thick, warm. It smelled like charcoal and hot metal. Behind a heavy door you could hear a hammer hitting something, a steady clang against stone. This wasn't a storeroom, it was a forge. Deep under an Assyrian palace, artisans were working. They turned ore into weapons. They made delicate gold leaf for the king above. These were hidden workshops, the fourth system, the industrial heart that powered the palace's wealth. Up in the courtyards there were ceremonies. Down below it was all industry. Pottery kilns, vats for dyeing textiles, massive ovens for baking bread enough to feed hundreds. Putting all this production under the palace served a few purposes. It contained the noise, the smoke, the intense heat, and it controlled knowledge, the formulas for purple dyes, the techniques for forging better iron, the designs for special pottery. These were state secrets, kept secure inside the palace walls. Industrial archaeologists point out these spaces were innovation hubs, protected and powered by the palace's resources. In bigger Roman complexes, there were possible underground workshops, places where specialized crafts happened under direct imperial oversight. Bringing these industries in-house meant a steady supply, essential goods, luxury goods, independent from foreign markets or unreliable trade, but concentrating production like this affected technological advancement. It created a hotbed for experimentation. Artisans from different trades worked close together. They could share ideas. Resources were guaranteed. That allowed for long-term projects, iterative improvements. A potter could test new clay mixes, could try different alloys, all funded by the palace. This protected environment accelerated specialization. It created master craftsmen. Their skills became legendary. But all this industry needed energy, a constant, tremendous source. The forge fires, the kiln heat, the warmth for the dye vats, they all demanded fuel. And that fuel came from a surprising source, an often overlooked one. It connected the palace directly to the land it ruled. The forge needed fuel, a steady fire, but a palace, what if it could find a power that didn't run out? Something from the earth itself. In Bath in England, the Romans found that. A hot spring coming up from the ground, heated deep in the crust. They didn't just build a bath over it. They channeled it, lead pipes, stone tanks, mixing the scalding water with cold to make it usable. This was harnessing a natural engine. The heated water filled the great bath, warmth and steam all year, and that water, scholars think it might have been rooted through hollow walls, under floors, heating the buildings nearby. The temple complex plugged into the earth's own energy. That idea tapping ambient power, it took other forms. The most common was the hypocaust, Roman underfloor heating. It started in a basement room. The slaves kept a constant fire. The hot air didn't go up a chimney, it was sent under the floor. The floor was raised on brick pillars, a hollow space. The air flowed through there, warming the tiles above. Then it traveled up through the walls in box tiles, warming the walls, then out through roof vents. The whole room became a radiant heater. It meant an elaborate hidden architecture, flues and supports underneath everything. The fuel cost was enormous, constant work, But the result, that comfort in villas and palaces, it defined Roman sophistication. Then beyond heat there was motion, water flow. In some larger palace basements there's evidence, a strong suspicion of water wheels. An aqueduct, after delivering its water, still had force as it descended. That flowing water could turn a wheel. That wheel could drive millstones for the palace bakery or run workshop machinery. There are clues from Hellenistic palaces where the knowledge existed. The aqueduct wasn't just a pipe, it was a kind of power cable. And engineers were learning how to plug things in. Using these sources did more than give comfort, it built prestige. A palace with naturally heated baths, warm floors in winter, it showed a command over nature, almost divine. It created effortless abundance. For a visitor stepping from a cold world into perpetual warmth, that was a physical lesson. In the ruler's power, control not just over people but over the elements, comfort became a political tool. But running these systems, the springs, the hypocausts, the possible water mills, it needed something beyond engineering, a new kind of mind, one that saw the palace not as beautiful rooms but as a single machine. A living system that led to a figure, a crucial shadowy figure in the corridors of power. The palace manager, a clay tablet pressed with cuneiform, went through a slot into a room below. It recorded barley paid, cloth owed. Down in that archive under the palace at Ebla, the kingdom's memory was written in clay. That was the fifth system, the hidden one, not water, not stone information. The administrative network, the minds working in the dark. These spaces were usually placed lower down or in protected wings. Practical reasons. The air was cooler there, more stable. That kept the clay tablets and the papyri from cracking in the heat, and they were secure, away from the public flow. Sensitive information stayed safe. They weren't grand halls, they were rooms lined with shelves or baskets or pigeonholes, each holding the documents that made the palace function, which made the city function. Says it well, the true power wasn't just in the throne room, it was in the archive where the kingdom's memory was kept. That memory was everything. A census of people, of livestock, a ledger of grain in the silos, a roster of skilled laborers, potters, weavers, soldiers, a calendar for religious offerings, treaties with neighboring kings. That centralized data was the operating system for the whole state. You see the scale at Nineveh in the Assyrian palaces. King Ashurbanipal's library wasn't just stories, it was a vast repository underground, tens of thousands of tablets, law, medicine, astronomy, administrative procedure, a deliberate project, to gather all known information under one roof, for the king's advisors to consult. To govern, you needed to know, you needed precedent, you needed records. That centralized management let you govern on a new scale. It allowed for planning. Knowing last year's harvest meant you could estimate this year's tax in grain. Having a list of all the villages meant you could organize labor for a building project, without crippling any one community. It allowed for accountability. A local official, sent to a distant province, could be held to the figures he reported, checked against the earlier records kept at the palace. It created continuity. When a king died, the bureaucracy didn't. The system of records meant the next ruler could pick up where the last one left off. The state outlived the individual. But this system created its own vulnerability. These archives held the blueprint of power. The maps, the tax rolls, the lists of allies and enemies. If they were destroyed or captured, the state's institutional memory could vanish. Its ability to function would crumble. So protecting these records became the ultimate imperative, protecting the hidden infrastructure that supported the whole city. The walls defending the palace above were just the first layer. The real security was deeper, more subtle, and often invisible. The King's Gate tunnel at Mycenae, a narrow passage carved right through the bedrock of the citadel. It ran from inside the palace out to a hidden gate far beyond the walls. In a siege with the main gates shut, this was a covert path for a messenger, or for a king to escape, or to bring reinforcements in behind an enemy. This was the fifth system, the one for ultimate security, defense built into the stone itself. But these weren't just escape routes, they were networks. Secret passages let the palace guard move unseen, to appear suddenly in a courtyard, or to secure the royal quarters from within. And then the communication shafts, narrow channels built into the walls, vertical tubes. Messages could pass between levels. Servant wouldn't hear a word. Information could travel invisibly. Later in European, they built the long, twisting galleries underground, sometimes with chambers. Their purpose is debated: storage or refuge or ritual, but their defensive value is clear. A hidden space deep in the earth, a last redoubt if the walls fell. Then there are the subtler features, the acoustic ones. In some palace walls, they find these pipes carefully sealed, for drainage maybe, or for listening to overhear the next room. Or to speak through a wall. The technology was simple, but the implication is profound. Control over information, control over the illusion of privacy. That was a powerful tool, which leads to a mystery in the Minoan palaces. Those narrow vertical shafts, the light wells. For a long time, we thought they were just for air and light, bringing it down to the lower floors. But some researchers have another theory. What if they channeled sound? A conversation in a courtyard above could drift down, amplified into a private chamber below. Or a chant from a hidden room could rise up into a public space. If that's true, then the architecture itself becomes a medium. The palace could whisper. This is how secrecy became power. It created an aura of omniscience, a ruler who seemed to know everything, who could appear or vanish, who could communicate without being seen. That psychological advantage was often stronger than any wall. It bred uncertainty and loyalty. You never knew who was listening, or what hidden route a guard might take. The true layout of the palace was a state secret, protecting its most vital asset, the people at its heart. But not all spaces hidden deep in the earth were for war or spies or storage. Some of the most carefully built chambers served a different purpose, connecting the palace not just to the city but to the cosmos. Beyond defense, the deepest foundations were often spiritual. A narrow staircase goes down from the throne room into a small chamber. The air is cool, damp. There's a square basin set into the floor lined with plaster. Steps go down into it, a lustral basin for ritual purification. So the physical descent mirrored a spiritual one. It connected the palace to the powers of the earth, to the underworld. And that shows a sixth layer of hidden infrastructure, the sacred below. Beyond logistics and defense, palaces often extended their deepest roots into ritual. These spaces were separate, accessed by few, crypts for ancestors built right under the foundations, anchoring the ruling family to the land. Sacred springs captured in stone chambers where the water was seen as a gift from the earth. Ritual baths for purification. Chambers for mystery cults where initiates went through rites away from everyone else. Their construction was often the most careful. Perfectly aligned, finely finished, meant to last forever. Religious historian Dr. notes that building down was as spiritually significant as building up. It rooted the palace in the cosmic order. The heights reached for the heavens, but the depths connected to the chthonic powers, the forces of the earth and the underworld. A ruler who controlled both dimensions claimed a more complete authority. You see this across cultures. Near many temples, archaeologists find a ritual pit. Not for garbage, but for sacred objects. When a cult statue got old or damaged, it couldn't just be thrown away. It was ceremonially retired, placed with other sacred items in these pits, a respectful return to the earth. In the Roman on the Palatine Hill, part of the imperial palace, there was an underground shrine to a nymph, a natural water source enclosed and right under the emperor's home. It tied his domestic power to a local, ancient spirit of the place. So this ritual use of infrastructure legitimized rule. It transformed practical necessity into divine mandate. A palace granary ensured survival. But if that granary was blessed by priests in an underground chapel, its abundance became a sign of divine favor. A water channel was engineering. But if that water emerged from a sacred spring in a crypt, its flow became a spiritual covenant. The ruler wasn't just managing resources. He was acting as an intermediary. The one who could channel the blessings of the earth and the ancestors for the people. This merging of the spiritual and the practical is clearest with the most critical resource. Water from a sacred spring wasn't just holy. It was also, invariably, the cleanest, most reliable source for the palace. The ritual bath for purification also served public health. The crypt for ancestors also secured the dynasty's claim to the land. So the hidden infrastructure did more than support the city. Wove the palace's authority into the fabric of belief, making challenge seem not just impractical but sacrilegious. The systems below ground upheld an idea as much as they upheld a building. The fountains at Versailles were a lie. Louis XIV would look out and see them, this spectacle of endless water. But that water was stolen. It was pulled from the Seine miles away, lifted by this monstrous machine, the machine Marley. 14 giant water wheels over 200 pumps, groaning day and night. The most powerful pumping system in the world, built just for the king's gardens, to make them defy physics. So the palace wasn't just using water, it was the command center for an entire hydraulic empire. And that shows you something. The greatest palaces, they sat right at the heart of the water network, the central point. In Rome, the water distribution castle, they built it at the highest point, like the Palatine Hill where the emperors lived. The aqueducts would pour their water into this massive tank, and from there lead pipes branched out, but not equally. The largest pipes went straight to the imperial palaces, to the public baths. Smaller pipes went to the elite villas. The public fountains got what was left. A palace official held the keys to the sluice gates. He decided the flow, so this wasn't just plumbing, it was a map of political priority, carved in lead under the streets. You see it in the Alhambra too, in Granada. Every courtyard there whispers with water. It runs through narrow channels, spills into reflecting pools. The Court of the Lions has that fountain with 12 marble lions, water flowing from their mouths. That water came from the mountains through a complex canal. Its path through the palace was choreographed. It cooled the air. It created music. It showed a tranquil mastery. The message was clear. In a dry land, the ruler who commanded water commanded life itself. His authority was as natural as the stream in the garden. So hydraulic management became a metaphor for governance, because the principles are the same. A good ruler, like a good engineer, ensures distribution, prevents blockages, corruption, hoarding, plans for drought, maintains the channels. When the system works, it's invisible. People are nourished. The city is clean. When it fails, everything collapses into thirst and disorder. That control over water was the palace's social contract. To provide this basic element was the foundation of its legitimacy. But that control demanded a hidden army. The machine Marley needed constant teams to repair its breaking wheels. The Roman aqueducts required inspectors walking the lengths, clearing debris. In the Alhambra, a water master walked the canals daily, adjusting small gates to direct the flow. This workforce was the silent heartbeat of the hydraulic state. They worked in the tunnels, in the pump houses, along the canals, unseen by everyone who enjoyed the results. Their daily maintenance turned an engineering marvel into a permanent instrument of power. And their deep knowledge of the system is what held the city together when the grand designs faltered. So there's a paradox. The palace projected absolute autonomous control, but its survival depended entirely on the competence of the people who understood the world beneath its floors. Their world was echoes and absolute darkness. Down under the Palatine Hill, a team moved through the Cloaca Maxima, sandals scraping on wet stone. The only light came from their small oil lamps, casting long shadows on the arched ceiling. They carried baskets of silt and debris, the waste of the city above, to be hauled out through a distant shaft. These were the sewer workers. Their labor was essential, but their existence was meant to be forgotten. By the senators, by the emperors whose world they kept clean. This was the invisible class. The designers, the diggers, the maintainers. The true architects of the city lived and worked in its shadow. These workers came from many backgrounds. Some were conscripted citizens, fulfilling a labor duty. Many were enslaved people, their lives and skills owned by the imperial household or the city itself. A smaller number were skilled freedmen, part of organized guilds. In Mesopotamia, records show guilds of well diggers and canal clearers, hereditary professions. A father passed the precise knowledge of soil, water tables, bricklaying to his son. Their expertise was a form of power, but it was a power that rarely translated into social status. They were indispensable, yet they remained in the depths. Dr. Sarah Jones, who studies ancient labor, puts it clearly. The grandeur above was made possible by the grime and expertise below. A society built on a foundation of invisible labor. The engineer who calculated the gentle slope of an aqueduct. The foreman who directed the laying of a sewer channel. The laborer who spent a lifetime maintaining a Qanat's air shafts. They formed a parallel society. One that understood the city not as monuments, but as a living, breathing machine. Stone and water. Their tools were simple but brilliantly effective. Bronze and later iron saws to cut stone, chisels and hammers. The most important tool was often just a length of cord and a weighted bob, a simple level. To ensure a water channel dropped just the right amount over a mile, they would stretch the cord, let the weight settle, and check the alignment. Perfection was achieved not with complex instruments but with patient generations' deep understanding, materials and physics. They used wooden forms to shape arches, clay models to plan pipe networks, their own keen observation of the natural world to find water and predict its flow. In Rome there were a respected corps, the water workers responsible for the aqueducts. They walked the elevated channels daily, clearing leaves and sediment, patching cracks in the mortar. They had keys to the distribution, regulating the flow to different city districts. Their knowledge was so critical they were often exempted from other civic duties. They held a paradoxical position, vital to public health and imperial prestige, yet their work kept them at the margins, physically and socially. This specialized knowledge brought a complex mix, freedom and constraint. For an enslaved worker with a skill stone dressing or pipe fitting, that expertise could offer a slightly better existence. They might be trusted with more responsibility, live in slightly better quarters, have a hope of earning manumission. Their skill was their one form of leverage in a system that them personhood. For a free laborer in a guild, that knowledge was a birthright and a prison. It guaranteed work and a community, but it also bound them to a life of difficult, often dangerous toil, with little chance to rise into the literate administrative class above. Their true legacy, though, is written in the enduring stone around them. The sewer that still functions after two, the aqueduct bridge still standing, the Qanat that still waters a field. They built for the ages, not for acclaim. Every perfectly fitted stone in a drain, every smoothly plastered cistern wall is a signature. The durability we marvel at today is the direct result of their uncompromising skill, executed far from the eyes that would eventually celebrate it. We remember the names of emperors and architects, but the city itself remembers the hands that carved its hidden veins. The plaster in its reservoirs had this faint pink color. It came from a secret recipe, and it wasn't just for decoration, it was waterproof. It kept the water from seeping back into the ground. That formula for that hydraulic plaster was a guarded craft, lost for centuries after the city fell. That points to the sixth system, the hidden one. The materials and the construction secrets that built everything underground. These weren't ordinary supplies. They were engineered solutions, made for moisture, for pressure, for time. Each civilization had its own arsenal from what the land gave them. In Mesopotamia, natural asphalt seeped up. They used bitumen as a sealant. They'd heat that thick black substance and brush it onto cistern bricks, onto bath drains. It made a flexible layer, impermeable. It kept water in, dampness out. A simple, brilliant use of a local resource, a solution to a universal problem. The Romans did something else. Their concrete opus was a revolution. It wasn't just crushed rock and lime. The secret was a volcanic ash, pozzolana from near the Bay of Naples. Mixed with lime and water, it created a chemical reaction. The paste wouldn't just dry, it would cure, harden even underwater, bond with incredible strength. That's what let them build the vast, waterproof vaults of the Cloaca Maxima, the massive cisterns that fed their cities, a material that seemed to defy nature, turning liquid stone into permanent form. But materials were only half of it. Building with them underground was a logistical puzzle. Imagine the scene: workers carving a drainage channel right into the mountainside. They aren't using mortar. They select each granite stone, shape it with precision, fit them together so tightly not even a blade of grass could slip between. That technique, ashlar masonry. It created channels that could withstand earthquakes, torrential rains for centuries. The construction itself was a feat. They had to quarry the stone, transport it up staggering slopes, assemble it in cramped, dark spaces, all without modern machinery. A symphony of human coordination executed in silence under the earth. The shapes they built were just as innovative, the arch and the vault. The unsung heroes. A simple ceiling of flat stones has a limited span. It collapses under the weight of the earth above. But an arch redirects that weight outward to the walls. A series of arches becomes a barrel vault, a long tunnel-like space that's incredibly strong. That principle let the Romans build sewers wide enough for boats. Let Mesopotamian engineers make underground storage rooms that wouldn't cave in. These forms turned empty space into durable volume. Specific components show this ingenuity. In Rome, the water that reached the palaces flowed through lead pipes. Lead was malleable, easy to bend around corners, durable. They knew the health risks, so the water was kept moving to minimize stagnation. In the Indus Valley, they used another fired material, standardized baked bricks, uniform bricks. They allowed for rapid, reliable construction. Well linings, intricate covers for street drains. Their consistency was a form of pre-industrial mass production, enabling a citywide infrastructure grid. Every material choice was a dialogue with the environment. You used what you had. You adapted it to what you needed. In a land of volcanoes, you used volcanic ash. In a land of tar pits, bitumen. In a land of mountains, precisely cut stone. These choices weren't just practical. They were an expression of a deep understanding of place. The resulting infrastructure became so resilient it often outlived the empires that built it. The aqueducts kept carrying water long after the last emperor fell. The Qanats kept flowing long after Persepolis was ash. The materials born of local earth and human genius became a legacy, written in stone and mortar, a hidden language of endurance speaking from the dark long after the lights went out above. The plaster in reservoirs had this pinkish tint, a secret recipe meant to last. But every system has a point where it breaks. In a storage room under the palace of Knossos, an archaeologist's trowel hit something, not pottery, a thick, even layer of fine gray silt. This room wasn't for trash. It was part of the water system, and it was completely clogged. That sediment tells a story. A single violent event, a catastrophic earthquake. It shattered the pipes and channels, the palace's lifeblood. In an instant, the engineered flow stopped. It became a stagnant pool, toxic. That's the other side of the story. What happens when the hidden infrastructure fails? Failure came in different forms. Sometimes it was sudden, a brutal shock of nature. An earthquake could shear an aqueduct, collapse a cistern vault, shift the gradient of a Qanat just enough to stop its flow forever. Other times it was slow, a silent death from neglect. These systems required meticulous maintenance, a continuous tax on attention and resources. If the guild of drain clearers disbanded, if the palace could no longer feed the workers who walked the aqueducts, the decline began subtly. A single clog in a main drain left uncleared season after season. It could cause backups, flood lower levels, undermine foundations. They find street drains completely filled with silt, a sign. The regular, communal cleaning rituals had stopped, long before the city was finally abandoned. Then there was deliberate destruction, war. During the Gothic wars of the 6th century, besieging armies learned something. To cripple a Roman city, you didn't just assault its walls, you targeted its aqueducts, cutting the elevated channels miles outside the city. It was a strategic. Within days, the public fountains in the forums would run dry. The baths central to Roman life would close. The palaces on the hills, dependent on that pressured flow, would have to rely on stale well water. The psychological blow was as severe as the physical one. A city that defined itself by its mastery of water was suddenly thrust back into a more primitive, precarious state. Its identity was broken along with its pipes. The consequences of such failures were never isolated, they cascaded. A breached aqueduct meant no water for the palace baths, but also no water for the public fountains. This forced the population onto contaminated wells or river water, leading to outbreaks of illness. A depleted granary, unable to distribute grain, led to famine prices, social unrest, an inability to pay or feed the soldiers who kept order. Clogged sewer drains turned streets into open cesspools, creating perfect conditions for disease to spread through a weakened, undernourished population. The political fallout was inevitable. As collapse theorist Dr. Henry Wright observed, the fall of a city often begins with the silence of its water. When the ruler could no longer guarantee the most basic elements, clean water, removal of waste, bread, the social contract dissolved. The palace's legitimacy, built into the stone conduits and grain silos, evaporated. Why obey a king who cannot keep the streets clean, who cannot keep the fountains flowing? This leads to a question. Can infrastructure failure be a primary cause of collapse, not just a symptom? The evidence from these silt-filled tunnels suggests it can. It can be the trigger, the thing that unleashes a chain of disaster. A society operating at the edge of its capacity has little margin for error. The hidden systems were its buffer. When they broke, the intricate balance of urban life shattered with them. The brilliant design that enabled greatness contained within it a blueprint, a precise blueprint for catastrophe. To understand that fragility is to finally see the hidden infrastructure, not as a passive foundation, but as the active living pulse of the ancient world. A pulse that, when it stopped, left only silence. And Stone, a Persian noble, he didn't go to a courtyard for shade. He went down a staircase. The air got cooler with each step. He reached a cellar room deep under the palace floor, and in the middle of a scorching summer he found a gentle breeze, a constant one. It was drawn down from a tower above. It captured the slightest wind high up and funneled it into this room underground. That was the seventh system, a masterpiece of environmental design. The hidden infrastructure wasn't just moving water and waste. It was sculpting the climate inside the palace walls, creating pockets of livable comfort in a landscape of extreme heat. Climate adaptation engineered into stone. The principles were elegant, born from watching nature. Geothermal cooling was the simplest and the most profound. Build rooms partly or fully underground and you tap into the Earth's stable temperature. The surface bakes in the sun, but the ground just a few feet down stays cool. Or an underground gallery uses that massive thermal mass as a heat sink. It draws warmth from the air and replaces it with a constant mild chill. But they didn't just hide from the heat, they fought it with air and water. The was a brilliant invention. These tall towers rose above the roofline with openings facing the prevailing wind. The captured wind was directed down a shaft into the living spaces below, and often that shaft would pass over a small pool of water or a Qanat channel. It picked up moisture. That created evaporative cooling, the same principle as a modern swamp cooler. Delivering a cool breeze into rooms with no other opening to the outside. The palace breathed through these hidden lungs. Water was central to this environmental choreography. The fountains and reflecting pools in courtyards weren't just decorative. They were terminal points of the hydraulic system, and they served a critical climatic function. As water evaporated in the dry heat, it absorbed thermal energy from the air, cooling the entire courtyard. That cooler, denser air would sink and flow into adjacent rooms, displacing the warmer air. The whole palace complex could become a passive air conditioning system, powered by the steady flow of water from underground. The strategic orientation of tunnels and vents perfected this flow. Architects designed subterranean passages not just for people, but for air. Some tunnels acted as intake vents. They channeled cool night air into thermal mass walls or underground chambers. During the day, as the palace heated up, that stored coolness would slowly radiate back out. Other vents, placed at high points, created a stack effect, letting hot air rise and escape, pulling cooler air in from below. It was a silent, perpetual exchange. A sophisticated understanding extended to long-term storage, storing cold itself. In the Persian, the ice house, engineers created a year-round supply of ice in the desert. Large dome-shaped structures with a deep underground storage pit. In winter, ice and snow from nearby mountains were brought and packed into the pit, insulated by thick walls of a special mortar called, resistant to heat transfer. The tall, conical dome above minimized sun exposure and let any rising warm air escape. Ice could be preserved well into the summer, a seemingly magical feat of underground insulation. A similar harmony is seen in the stepwells of India, like Rani Vav. While a public monument, its principles were used in palaces. This wasn't a simple well. It was a grand, inverted temple carved into the earth, descending multiple stories. As you went deeper, the air became significantly cooler, more humid. The design provided access to the water table, but it also created a profound microclimate, a refuge from the blistering surface heat during the day. The act of going down for water became a journey into coolness. These designs reveal a philosophy. The environment wasn't an adversary to conquer with brute force. It was a partner to understand and harmonize with. The palace didn't just exist on the land. It was woven into its thermal rhythms, its water cycles, its wind patterns. This was sustainable technology in the truest sense, using the constant, free energy of the earth, sun, and wind to create comfort without consumption. The infrastructure beneath the palace was a dialogue with the ecosystem. An architecture that listened to the whispers of the wind and the deep, steady chill of the ground. And this intricate, climate-responsive design reached its most critical purpose. In the spaces where the palace's survival was literally measured, the rooms that held its wealth, its memory, and its future, a whisper could travel a surprising distance through those ceramic pipes. In the palace of Diocletian, built for an emperor's retirement, some walls had these hollow tubes sealed up. They were for drainage, certainly, but their placement suggests something else. A speaking tube, maybe, or a listening device. And that points to an eighth layer of the hidden palace, an acoustic dimension, the deliberate management of sound. It was an infrastructure for the ears, engineered to carry certain noises and suppress others, to create awe or to enable secrecy, to broadcast power without a single visible gesture. This field is called, it listens to the past. Dr. Miriam notes that spaces were designed not just to be seen but to be heard, or for certain sounds not to be heard. The goal was total environmental control over every sense. For rituals, sound was a tool of transcendence. The most striking example is in the Andes. At a ceremonial center that predates the Incas there's a labyrinth of underground galleries. In one of these cramped, dark chambers, archaeologists found something, a series of carved stone ducts. And if you blew a conch shell trumpet into one of these ducts at a specific angle, the sound transformed. It became a roaring, monstrous bellow, amplified and distorted by the resonant chamber of the gallery itself. For an initiate in the dark, that sound would have seemed superhuman. The voice of a deity speaking from the bones of the earth. The architecture itself became a ritual instrument. This principle of resonance was used more subtly elsewhere. In throne rooms or audience halls, the placement of columns, the curve of a niche, the wall plaster could be tuned to amplify a speaker's voice, to give it a richer, more commanding timbre. A ruler's pronouncements didn't just carry farther. They sounded different, more authoritative, as if the building itself endorsed his words. And then the same understanding was applied to create silence or privacy. Those service corridors, the ones we discussed earlier, were often designed to dampen sound. Their rough, irregular stone walls, their winding paths, their soft earthen floors all helped to absorb the noise. The clatter of servants' footsteps, the clang of pots, the murmur of messages. This acoustic separation was as vital as the visual one. It maintained the illusion of a serene palace above, free from the noise of its own sustenance. And then there was surveillance. Those hollow wall pipes in Roman palaces are a clue. If they were speaking tubes, they allowed private communication between rooms. A warning could be passed, an order given, but if they were used for listening, the implications shift. A servant or a guard in a small adjacent chamber could overhear conversations in a senator's room next door. The technology was simple. The power it granted was profound. Control over information, over the illusion of privacy, is a classic instrument of authority. It breeds caution and compliance. Even water, the lifeblood of the palace, may have carried sound. Some researchers think flowing water in certain channels through specific fountain designs could create a constant, gentle white noise. A natural sound barrier, masking private conversations in nearby courtyards or gardens. The pleasant murmur of water served a dual purpose, aesthetic and practical. It painted an auditory picture of tranquility while actively concealing the words spoken within it. We see echoes of this later in structures like the Whispering Galleries. In Saint's Cathedral in London, a person whispering against the wall on one side can be heard clearly by someone on the opposite side, far across the dome. The sound travels along the curved surface. That's a later example, but it shows a principle ancient builders likely observed. The shape of a space could conduct sound in seemingly magical ways. So controlling these soundscapes contributed to atmosphere and authority by completing the sensory illusion of power. A ruler could orchestrate an experience. From the terrifying roar of a ritual trumpet underground, to the clear, resonant delivery of law in a throne room, to the serene silence of his private gardens, he demonstrated command not just over people and resources, but over the physics of perception. The palace became an instrument, and he was its conductor. This manipulation of sensory experience extended beyond sound to an even more fundamental sense, one tied directly to survival and to the deepest anxieties of urban life. Deep in a storage cellar in Nineveh, a worker's world was defined by two things: absolute darkness, and then the single flickering point of an oil lamp. That flame was a risk. It gave you the light to read a clay tablet, to check a grain seal. But one spark in that enclosed, dusty space could mean disaster. So the lamp went in a wall niche on a stone shelf, away from anything flammable. Its fuel was chosen carefully, maybe sesame oil, which burned cleaner than animal fat with less smoke. This was the eighth system, the one you might overlook: illumination. The strategies to push back the perpetual night under the palace. It was a constant negotiation. The need to see and the danger of fire, functionality and the staggering cost of fuel. The main solution, whenever you could, was to steal light from the sun. Light wells were the vertical shafts lined with polished white plaster cut from the roof down through multiple floors. In the palace of Minos at Knossos, these weren't just holes. They were sophisticated. A light well would open onto a central courtyard above, capturing sunlight and air. And as it descended, it would light up a series of rooms on each level through doorways and clear-story windows, those high windows placed above head level. This created a cascade of borrowed light, pushing deep into the administrative quarters below. The well also worked as a thermal chimney. It drew stale air up and out, pulling fresh, cool air in from lower openings. Light and air were engineered together. When direct sunlight wasn't possible, you used reflection. In Assyrian palaces, they had sheets of polished bronze as mirrors. Positioned at the top of a shaft or at a corridor's turn, they could catch a beam of sunlight and redirect it dozens of feet into a room that never saw the sky. The famous Egyptian mirrors of polished copper alloy did the same thing in palaces and tombs, bending light around corners. Even the room materials were part of the strategy. Floors of white gypsum plaster, walls painted in light colors, these surfaces acted as diffuse reflectors. They bounced the light further, softened shadows, made a space feel less like a cavern. The lamps themselves showed incremental improvement. The simplest were shallow, open clay dishes with a pinched lip to hold a wick, but these were smoky and spilled easily. The solution was the enclosed lamp, a small handled vessel with a covered oil reservoir and a spout for the wick. That design was safer. It reduced evaporation and controlled the flame. The fuels evolved too. Olive oil was clean burning but expensive. Fish oil or rendered animal fat was cheaper but smokier, and it smelled. The choice often mapped the room's importance and the user's status. A scribe in the royal archive might have a lamp with fine oil. A laborer in a grain cellar made do with a smoky tallow candle. The most ingenious solutions came from understanding the sun's journey. Architects oriented light wells and clear-story windows not just to capture light, but to capture it at the right time. A storage room checked in the morning might have an eastern-facing shaft, flooding it with dawn light. A workshop used in the afternoon would catch the western sun. There's even evidence, debated but fascinating, of using naturally phosphorescent materials. Certain crushed minerals or prepared substances could be applied to walls or markers. They'd give off a faint, ghostly glow in total darkness after being charged by a lamp. A way to mark a path or a danger point without keeping a live flame. This mastery of illumination changed how underground spaces could be used. A well-lit storage room could be efficiently. A brightly lit corridor was safer for transport, allowed for more complex traffic patterns. A scriptorium with good light let detailed administrative work move out of the crowded upper floors. Light transformed a dank cellar from a hole in the ground into a functional, integrated part of the palace machine. It extended the useful hours of the day for critical work. In the end, the ability to reliably light the depths was what tied all the hidden systems together. It allowed for the inspection of water channels, the repair of drainage pipes, the auditing of granary stocks, the movement of guards through secret passages. Without light, the underground world was inert, dangerous, useless. With it, it became a manageable, vital extension of the palace above. This control over light and dark in the Earth's belly was the final prerequisite for the most ambitious vision. Not just building a palace with clever basements, but designing an entire city from the ground up, with the hidden infrastructure as its foundational blueprint. From the air you could see it. The truth of ancient Rome written in water. The aqueducts didn't end in some central reservoir for everyone. Their final branches they climbed, like arteries up toward the Palatine and hills, serving the villas, the palaces of the elite first. That visual map reveals something. The hidden systems under the palace, they didn't just serve it. They shaped the whole city growing around it. The infrastructure became a blueprint, organizing streets, markets, neighborhoods, all according to one central priority. The palace's logistical needs dictated the city's geography. Urban historian Doctor puts it clearly. The palace wasn't just in the city. It organized the city around its logistical needs. You see this principle in the grand, planned cities. Alexandria, founded by Alexander the Great. That design wasn't an accident. The royal quarter, though, was placed on a peninsula, with direct, privileged access to the great harbor. Canals from the Nile were routed to serve that district first, before reaching other parts of the city. The main street, the Way, it wasn't just a grand boulevard. It was a supply line, connecting the palace to the Gate of the Sun and the routes inland. The city's famous grid of streets, it facilitated movement. The movement of goods and soldiers to and from the center of power. The palace wasn't an occupant, it was the anchor. This organizing force operated on every level. The need to feed the palace complex meant vast granaries had to be built nearby, along the waterfront for easy shipment. Those granaries in turn attracted markets. The markets needed artisans, potters for storage jars, weavers for sacks, metalworkers for scales. So artisan quarters grew up around these logistical hubs. Residential zones for these workers then radiated outward. The street layout often evolved to facilitate transport. Transport of goods from the docks or gates straight to the palace stores, creating main thoroughfares that became the city's commercial spines. A neighborhood's prosperity could hinge on its position along this hidden supply chain. This palace-centric model created a distinct social geography. Proximity to the clean water lines, to the secure storage, to the well-maintained drains became a marker of status. The elite lived along the routes of the best infrastructure. The further you lived from the palace's direct service line, the more you relied on public fountains, secondary drains, distant markets. The city's quality of life was mapped in concentric circles, emanating from the palace's underground networks. Which leads to a question. Did this integration create a more resilient city or a more fragile one? On one hand, it created incredible efficiency. A centralized system with clear priorities could marshal resources for large projects, maintain standards, respond to crises from a position of strength. The palace, as the engine, could drive urban growth and stability. On the other hand, it created a profound vulnerability. The entire urban organism was optimized to serve the center. If that center was cut off by a siege, a natural disaster, or internal collapse, the entire system could seize. The neighborhoods furthest from the palace's direct supply lines would suffer first, and most severely. The city's resilience was tied directly to the health of its core. This integration reached its logical peak. In the concept of the palace as a micro-city, the royal complex wasn't just a home. It contained within its walls all the systems of an urban center: granaries, workshops, water reservoirs, temples, administrative archives, and housing for a small army of retainers and workers. It was a city in miniature, capable of operating with a degree of autonomy from the larger metropolis around it. This design served as both a practical safeguard and a powerful symbol. It demonstrated that the ruler possessed a self-contained, perfect world, a model of ideal order, from which the rest of the city's order flowed. The palace didn't just use the city's infrastructure, it presented itself as the source from which all infrastructure originated. That drive for total integration, it found its final form. The palace didn't just organize the city, it tried to become the city. A self-contained world, an engineered ecosystem humming inside its own walls. The goal was a deep self-sufficiency, to withstand any storm, any siege, any collapse outside. That was the ninth system, the palace as a living organism. Imagine an idealized complex, not just courtyards but terraced gardens, fed by a dedicated underground channel from the main aqueduct. Livestock pens for poultry, goats, dairy cows, dovecotes for eggs and meat, workshops for every essential craft, and beneath it all the granaries and cisterns holding months of reserves. This was a design principle, especially for palaces in remote or vulnerable places. They were built as island fortresses where the island was a micro-civilization. The Romans perfected this in their country villas. The vivarium was a walled game preserve for deer and boar. They also built elaborate fish ponds stocked with edible fish, mullet, sea bass. The pools were sometimes connected to the main water system for controlled flow. Kitchen waste, stable waste, it wasn't just discarded. It was composted for the palace gardens. A closed loop. Food waste nourished the soil, which grew food, which created more waste. A primitive, conscious recycling. Turning a problem into a resource. Water was managed with the same intent. In some complexes, used water from baths and kitchens, it wasn't sent straight to the sewer. It went through settling tanks first. Then it might irrigate non-food crops or flush latrines or water livestock. Every drop worked multiple times before it left the grounds. That reduced the draw on the aqueduct, stretching reserves in a crisis. The most complete example might be the Byzantine Great Palace in Constantinople. It wasn't a single building. It was a district atop the city's Acropolis, a city within a city. It contained multiple churches, barracks, immense halls, the imperial residence, but also its own bakeries, workshops for regalia, its own stables, vast underground cisterns like the Basilica cistern. It had private harbors on the sea of. The palace could seal its gates and operate independently for a long time. Its needs were met by an internal economy, serviced by thousands who lived and worked inside. The emperor wasn't just ruler of the city. He was governor of a separate enclave at its heart. This autonomy had a complex impact on the urban economy. It created a parallel insular market. The palace's demand for luxury goods, fine textiles, spices, artisans, that still stimulated trade. But its demand for basic staples could be met internally. That reduced reliance on the city's public markets for grain, meat, pottery. It insulated the imperial household from price shocks that affected everyone else. But it also concentrated the most advanced knowledge inside the walls. Techniques for intensive gardening, animal husbandry, water recycling, developed and perfected there. That knowledge didn't always spread out to benefit the wider city's farms. Maintaining this closed system was a staggering managerial feat. It required a small army of overseers. The head gardener coordinated with the keeper of the dovecotes and the supervisor of the fish ponds to balance protein. The water master allocated flows between drinking water, baths, irrigation, livestock. The keeper of the granaries planned distributions for the nobility, the staff, the guards, the enslaved workers inside. A single failure, a blight in the gardens, disease in the poultry, a leak in a cistern, could ripple through the entire loop, threatening the balance. This self-sustaining design shows the deepest anxiety and the highest aspiration of ancient power. The anxiety was dependence. The aspiration was sovereignty. By building a world that could, in theory, function alone, the palace tried to transcend the messy realities of the city it ruled. An attempt to create order in miniature. A perfect, manageable universe where every need was anticipated, every resource cycled, every person had a role. In its underground channels and its sunlit gardens, the palace wasn't just surviving. It was performing an ideal, a vision of civilization that was complete, independent, eternal. But to make that vision real required one final, overarching system, one that didn't move water or grain but something more abstract, and far more powerful: the road to the palace at Persepolis. It was a straight line, an imposing path for visitors and tribute, but it was also something else. Under the stone it was a drainage channel, built to carry away floodwater from the desert. That wasn't an accident, it was a fusion. The symbolic straight line to power was physically held up by the practical system that kept it clear. The hidden part wasn't just engineering, it was ideology, in the stone and in the water. These systems were built to send messages. The first was control. If a ruler could command water, make it come from a mountain spring miles away, that showed a power beyond just defeating human enemies. It was mastering the elements. The second message was order. The predictable flow of clean water, the silent removal of waste. It imposed a human logic on the chaos of nature and city life. It showed the state could organize the world into a system, a functioning system. The third was technological mastery. The scale of it, aqueducts over valleys, tunnels through mountains. It was meant to stun people, to say the ruler commanded not just armies but knowledge, the coordinated labor that could reshape the landscape itself. But maybe the strongest message was benevolence. By providing these public things, clean water at fountains, sewers that kept streets clean, the palace framed its power as protective, paternal. It created a dependency that felt like care. As the art historian Dr. points out, this hidden engineering was the ultimate power display. It made the miraculous seem effortless, constant water waste removal. It seemed divinely ordained. The ruler didn't look like he was toiling. He looked like he was channeling a natural order for the benefit of his people. The infrastructure did the persuasion, silently, every day. You see this symbolic endpoint in Roman palaces. The aqueduct, that huge feat of long-distance engineering, didn't just end at a tank. It often ended at an emphyem, A monumental fountain in the palace grounds, decorated, water that traveled for miles would finally cascade over statues of gods and nymphs, a shimmering, noisy celebration. That endpoint changed the whole system. The aqueduct wasn't just a pipe anymore. It was a delivery mechanism for spectacle. A way to concentrate the empire's hydraulic might into a single, beautiful display, right in the emperor's home. The message was clear. All this technology, all this labor exists to create this moment, this beauty and comfort for me, and for those I allow to see it. So it leads to a question. Can you read a society's values in its sewers as clearly as in its statues? A statue of a king speaks of ego, military might, but a citywide sewer system speaks of public health, collective well-being, an investment in the mundane details that make a city work. The statue celebrates the individual. The sewer sustains the community. The priorities etched into the underground channels, who got water first, which neighborhoods had drainage, they reveal the real social contract. More than the propaganda on the palace walls ever could. When we find these spaces now, we're not just finding old pipes. We're decoding a lost language of power. Every sloped drain, every vast cistern, every hidden service corridor. They were characters in that language. They spoke of a world where control was total, where order was engineered into the fabric of life, where the ruler's authority was rooted as deeply in the earth as his palace foundations. That symbolic layer adds depth to the stones we uncover. It means the true palace wasn't the building you saw. It was the idea you were meant to believe in, an idea that was built and maintained and flowing silently beneath your feet. The Roman Forum had been dust for centuries, but the ground underneath it, that was something else. In the 1800s, people went down there with lanterns and pickaxes. They broke into these shadowed vaults, these forgotten channels. They had a name for them, hypogea, and they talked about them with a kind of Gothic awe. Called them the bowels of history. These explorers, they were usually looking for treasure, lost hordes of emperors, so they saw everything wrong. A functional drain looked like a secret prison. A service corridor got labeled a dungeon. A water channel seemed like a route for escape. Their vision was romantic, fueled by fiction. It created a modern myth of the underground, a place of mystery and dread, not engineering, not daily order. That romantic rediscovery set the tone. For generations, it fed right into the Gothic literature of the 19th century. Secret passages, ancient crypts, they became staples. The idea of a palace having a dark underside, a labyrinth that captured people, gave rise to urban legends everywhere. In London, you still hear whispers, secret tunnels from the Tower to the Palace of Westminster, stories that are much more tantalizing than the truth of medieval sewers or postern gates. That fascination overshadowed the real genius down there, the mundane genius. Take the grotto under the Palace of Westminster. It's a medieval undercroft, a vaulted space of stone. For years, people debated it. Was it a secret meeting chamber, a hidden treasury? Modern archaeology suggests it was almost certainly a storage cellar, a service area for the original palace. But the romance of the secret is hard to kill. Our instinct is to ascribe drama to the dark, to see intentional mystery where there was just practical necessity. That journey from myth to understanding, it marks the evolution of archaeology itself. The discipline moved from treasure hunting to science. Early interpretations, dungeons, and secret treasury, they slowly gave way to functional analysis. Researchers started asking different questions, not who was imprisoned here, but how the water moved, not what gold was hidden, but what the grain capacity of a silo was. They mapped gradients, analyzed plaster, studied flow rates. The narrative shifted. From hidden power to displayed power, the power to organize, to sustain, to engineer a civilization. Now the technology lets us see these systems with a clarity those 19th century explorers couldn't imagine. Ground-penetrating radar sends pulses into the earth. Maps buried walls and voids without moving a stone. Laser scanners, LiDAR, create 3D models of entire tunnel networks. They reveal alignments, construction techniques, things invisible to the eye. Thermal imaging can show the ghost of a buried aqueduct by detecting subtle temperature differences in the soil. We're not just guessing in the dark anymore. We're illuminating the ancient blueprint with digital light. This leap does more than correct old mistakes. It lets us appreciate the scale, the sophistication of these networks as integrated systems. We can simulate water flow through a Minoan drainage channel, calculate the structural load of a Roman vault, See how a Persian Qanat system interacted with the water table over centuries. The hidden infrastructure is finally being seen for what it was: the central nervous system of the ancient city, a masterpiece of pragmatic design. So our fascination with the hidden, it shaped historical narratives, created a duality for a long time. The glorious sunlit history of palaces and kings was separate from a dark speculative history of secrets and suffering. Modern archaeology is merging those two stories. It shows the hidden world wasn't the opposite of the glorious one. It was the foundation. The true secret wasn't a conspiracy. It was the profound, everyday effort required to make the spectacle above possible. Our tools let us read that story in the stones now, moving from romance to revelation. And in doing that, we recover the full genius of the past. A laser pulse goes out from an aircraft over a Maya city. It cuts through the canopy, but it never actually hits the ground. It bounces back, and that reflection carries data. Over time, that data builds. Pixel by pixel, it strips the jungle away, reveals the shape of the earth underneath. And then you see it, a huge geometric depression. Perfectly aligned with the palace, it's a reservoir system on a staggering scale, invisible for 1,000 years. That's the modern system, the 10th one. These technologies that let us see the hidden city in its full complexity, tools like LiDAR, light detection and ranging, they're revolutionary. The method is to send millions of laser pulses from a plane or a drone. You measure the time it takes for each pulse to come back. That creates a precise three-dimensional map of the ground surface, even through thick vegetation. It shows you the subtle topography of ancient engineering, the raised causeways, the sunken canals, the outlines of plazas and reservoirs that are otherwise lost. We're not just digging in the dark anymore. As Dr. a digital archaeologist, puts it, we can see the hidden city before we break ground. That changes the entire discovery process. An archaeologist can survey a vast area in days, identify the promising sites, then do a targeted excavation. It turns a search in the jungle into a strategic investigation. Then on a smaller scale, there's ground-penetrating radar. You push a device over the soil. It sends radio waves down into the earth. When those waves hit something, a buried wall, a void, a different soil layer, they bounce back. It creates a sonogram of the subsurface. This lets researchers map buried foundations, trace the path of a pipe under a Roman villa's floor, locate a forgotten cistern without moving a single stone. It's archaeology through gentle listening. Then all this data goes into computers to build immersive three-dimensional models. Now you can walk through a digital reconstruction of an ancient sewer or simulate a flood through the drainage channels of Persepolis to test their capacity. You can calculate flow rates in aqueducts, analyze structural stresses on a vault. This is virtual archaeology. It allows for endless experimentation without risking damage to the fragile ruins themselves. The science goes deeper, to the molecular level, isotopic analysis. It examines chemical fingerprints in materials. By analyzing the isotopes in the lead of Roman pipes, researchers can trace the ore back to specific mines in Spain or Britain, mapping the empire's trade in infrastructure materials, or studying isotopes in the plaster layers inside a cistern. That can reveal periods of repair or changes in the water source over centuries. The stones are keeping a diary. And we're learning how to read it. Some of the most startling revelations come from particle physics, muon tomography. It uses cosmic rays, muons that constantly shower the Earth. These particles pass more easily through empty space than through dense stone. So you place sensitive detectors in known chambers, like the base of a pyramid, and you measure how many muons pass through from above. That creates a density map, which reveals hidden voids. This was used to detect a potential large chamber in the Great Pyramid of Giza. And in Italy, researchers have used similar methods to map the buried ancient waterways that still flow beneath the modern streets of Naples. We're using particles from deep space to probe secrets deep in the earth. All this forces a reconsideration. What other undiscovered systems might lie beneath the ruins we think we know? Every new scan, every new map suggests our understanding is still a sketch. There could be entire hydraulic networks under celebrated sites, waiting to be revealed, forgotten subterranean highways linking palaces to ports, or vast, uncharted storage complexes that could rewrite our estimates of ancient populations. This technological vision does more than add details. It changes the legacy of the ancient engineers. We can now appreciate the true scope of their planning, the interconnectedness of their designs. They weren't just solving local problems. They were building integrated, resilient systems. Their work, hidden for so long, is finally being seen for the continental-scale achievement it was. The modern tools grant us a kind of X-ray vision, letting us see the bones of the ancient world. And in those bones we find a new story, one of foresight, coordination, and a genius that was literally foundational. Mexico City is sinking. It was built on the drained bed of an ancient lake, and now that foundation is buckling under the weight of the modern city. But some architects, they aren't looking for new solutions. They're looking back, into the mud, into the history of the lake that was erased. They're studying the Aztec capital that was here, a city of canals, and these artificial islands made of reeds and lake mud. They weren't just gardens, they were a system. The canals were for transport, for irrigation. They grew food. Their roots filtered the water. City waste became compost for the crops, a closed loop, a sustainable system built by an entire society. And for a city now dealing with water scarcity and sinking ground, the ancient answer is clear: don't fight the water. Live with it, integrate the city into the water cycle, don't sever it. That old system isn't a relic, it's a blueprint. The challenges are familiar: overpopulation, scarcity, a changing climate. The ancient world faced these pressures with stone, with gravity, with observation, and their solutions are finding new relevance. Take reuse. In Roman villas, water was used in stages, bath water for a garden. This was a recognition of water's different qualities. Modern green building standards now promote the same thing, using water from sinks and showers, not as waste but as a resource, for toilets, for irrigation. It's the same ancient logic with modern pumps. Or local materials. The Romans used volcanic ash from, the Mesopotamians used local bitumen. They built with what the land provided. That minimized transport. It created materials suited to the local conditions. This idea is central now. Using rammed earth, local stone, it reduces the carbon footprint. It connects a building to its place. Then there's the gravity-fed system. The Qanat, an ancient Persian technology. It sustained deserts and it's being revived. In Oman, in Arizona, communities are cleaning old Qanat tunnels or building new ones. They need no fossil fuels, just an understanding of slope and geology. They deliver water without evaporation. In a world of energy-intensive desalination, the Qanat is passive design. It represents a different progress, harmony with natural systems. Ancient climate control is being rediscovered. The of Persia, they're the ancestors of modern natural ventilation. Architects in hot, dry climates are using these principles now, designing towers to capture cool breezes, funneling them over water for cooling, distributing that air without mechanical systems. The goal is the same as it was, to create comfort using wind and the thermal mass of the earth. And the materials themselves. Scientists are studying Roman concrete, its durability, its apparent self-healing property. The secret seems to be quicklime and volcanic ash, which created a material that could seal its own cracks. Water would seep in and trigger new reactions. This has inspired research into self-healing concrete for modern infrastructure. Bridges, tunnels, sea walls that repair themselves. The recipe for a 2,000-year-old material might be the key. So how does looking back help? The relevance points to a specific ingenuity. It wasn't just solving a problem. It was solving it within the limits of the local environment, using physics, observing nature. The hidden infrastructure worked because it was integrated. The water system supported the gardens. The waste fertilized them. The storage ensured stability. Each part supported the others. Our modern cities often work in silos. Water management here, waste disposal there, energy over here. The ancient model suggests true sustainability comes from seeing the city as one interconnected organism. The lesson isn't a specific pipe, it's a philosophy, integration, cyclical resource use, building with nature's logic. In the silent flow of a Qanat, in the recycled nutrients in the cool breath there's a powerful idea that the most advanced technology sometimes listens closest to the earth, and the foundations for our future might be waiting in the past. Under the temple of the sun there's a corridor, a dark space, and in the walls you find these channels, 3 of them. They zigzag, cut with a precision that doesn't make sense. They go straight into the bedrock, and no one knows where they end. They're too narrow for anyone to walk through, too carefully made just for water, so maybe they carried something sacred, beer or blood from sacrifices, something that followed the path of the sun. Or maybe they fed water to a garden no one can see, or they were shaped to carry sound, to amplify chanting. But after all this time, the tunnels are silent. We've studied them for centuries, and their purpose is still a quiet puzzle, one of those things that reminds you. For all our scanning, all our mapping, the ancient world keeps some secrets. It guards them. For every system we get, an aqueduct, a sewer, a granary, there's a space that doesn't fit, a chamber, a tunnel, something that just doesn't match our models. These are the questions left in stone. They keep the story from ending, and that keeps it alive. Take the structure under the ziggurat of Ur. Deep inside, excavators found a vault, a perfect chamber of baked brick, sealed for thousands of years, and it was empty, no treasure, no bones, no writing, just a void, beautifully made. Was it a tomb for the god, a sealed offering room that got looted long ago, or a foundation deposit? An architectural time capsule meant for no one to ever find. We call it a crypt because we need a word, but its true function is a blank. A gap in how we understand sacred building in Mesopotamia. Then there's the water. In Jerusalem, the royal citadel needed the spring to survive, but the spring was outside the walls, a huge weakness, so they built the Siloam Tunnel, a winding S-shaped channel, cut through 500 meters of solid rock to bring the water inside. But the mystery isn't the tunnel, it's the spring itself. There isn't a steady flow, it's a siphon spring, it surges, it's irregular. So how did the engineers predict that? How did they manage that erratic pulse and turn it into a daily supply? For the palace and for the people. The hydrological data is gone. We can see the system, but we can't fully comprehend it. And the first palace we talked about, Knossos, its foundations are a maze. Narrow corridors, small rooms, dead ends. Sir Arthur called it a labyrinth, tied it to the Minotaur myth. But was it? Maybe this confusing substructure was practical. A massive organized storage complex, different rooms for different goods, access tightly controlled. Or maybe it was a physical form of administrative complexity, where moving goods and people was ritualized, restricted. The name labyrinth might forever shape how we see it, hiding a functional reality we still haven't figured out. As pointed out, for every answer archaeology gives, the ground offers two new questions. That's not a failure, that's the engine. These mysteries are the frontiers. They're what pull researchers back into the dust, what inspire new tools, what force us to question what we think we know. So what could a future discovery rewrite? About ancient power. Imagine finding a network, connecting the underground infrastructures of separate palaces across a region, a hidden highway. Not for people but for resources or information. That would mean a level of cooperation or control we never guessed. Or imagine evidence that the climate systems in Persian palaces were calibrated using astronomy, turning the whole complex into a calendar. That would fuse political power with cosmic authority in a new way. These aren't just fantasies. They come directly from the questions posed by the silent tunnels and the empty chambers. They make sure the story of the hidden palace is never fully closed. The past isn't a static puzzle to solve. It's a conversation. And the most intriguing lines are the ones we haven't heard yet. A civilization story is told in two places, in the monuments that rise up into the light, and in the silent channels that carry the dark. We've followed those hidden veins, the water that gave life, the drains that carried death away, the workshops that made wealth, the crypts that held belief. These weren't just utilities buried out of sight. They were the foundational technology, the operating system that let the city itself boot up, to grow, to become more than a collection of huts. They created stability, and that stability allowed for art, for law, for the whole complex theater of power. That played out in the sunlit courtyards above. The real marvel is in the weaving. The ancient engineers didn't separate the practical from the symbolic. A sewer was civic order, made stone. An aqueduct was divine favor, given a measurable flow. A granary was an economic buffer, and a testament to the king's foresight. They built systems that worked on every level, hydraulic, political, spiritual. The infrastructure was the physical expression of an idea. That human society could impose a lasting order, a functional order on the raw chaos of nature, and that this order, coming from the palace, was both necessary and benevolent. So next time you walk through a historic site, let your gaze drop from the column capitals to the ground at your feet, and then let your imagination go deeper. Beneath the flagstones, beneath the grass there, in the perpetual dark, beats the heart of ancient ingenuity, a labyrinth of intention. Where every sloped channel was a thought, every vaulted tunnel a decision, every reservoir a promise to the future, that hidden world is the key to the one you see. It turns a ruin into a living story, a story of problem solving on a grand generational scale. This perspective does more than deepen our appreciation. It hands us a lens for looking at our own world. Our cities today face parallel challenges: water, waste, energy, resilience. The ancient answers won't be our blueprints, but they can be our inspiration. They remind us that the most elegant solutions work with nature, not against it, that sustainability is about integrated systems, not isolated gadgets, and that the legacy we leave for the future might just be the infrastructure we build or rebuild today.